He laughed at my filing cabinets full of dirt samples. Those cabinets were the only legal proof behind $89 million in mineral rights. 11 cabinets. Gray steel, dented on the corners from decades of being shoved against cinder block walls and dragged across concrete floors. Each one held field samples, chain of title records, original survey plats going back to before most of the people in that building were born. 60 years of mineral rights documentation for 47,000 acres of Appalachian leaseland, organized in a system I built with my own hands over 23 years. Tyler Gentry looked at those cabinets the way you'd look at a dead animal on the side of the road. Mild disgust, vague amusement. He was standing behind his glass desk, not Walter's old oak desk, which Tyler had removed his second week, with his MacBook open in front of him. He never looked up from it. Not once during the entire conversation. Sandra Walsh stood to his right. She was in her 40s, held a manila folder against her chest like a shield, and had the expression of someone watching a building get condemned that she knew was still structurally sound. She didn't say a word. Tyler gestured at the archive room behind me, the room with the 11 cabinets. "We're going digital," he said. "This whole room is legacy infrastructure." He paused, smiled at his own line like he'd rehearsed it. "So are you." I looked at the cabinets through the open door. Looked at the folder in Sandra's hands. Looked at Tyler, who was now scrolling something on his screen. "I understand," I said. That was it. But here's what Tyler Gentry didn't know. And here's what nobody in that room knew, including Sandra Walsh, who I'd worked alongside for 9 years and who couldn't meet my eyes. Those cabinets weren't just files. They were the legal ground truth beneath every active mineral lease Gentry Resource Holdings operated. And the man standing in front of Tyler's glass desk, the one being told he was legacy infrastructure, was the only living person who knew how to read them. My name is Harlan James Birch. I'm 55 years old. I spent 8 years in the United States Army, Staff Sergeant, 12th Engineer Battalion, Combat Engineering, Land Survey, Terrain Mapping, Explosive Ordnance Clearance, the kind of work where precision isn't a corporate value printed on a lobby wall. It's the difference between a clean detonation and a body bag. I've been at Gentry Resource Holdings for 23 years, Director of Land Management. I managed every mineral rights acquisition, every lease renewal, every survey boundary dispute across 47,000 acres of coal and natural gas territory, stretching from Fayette County to McDowell County and into the southern edge of Mingo. I walked those ridges myself, every one of them, with a transit rod and a field notebook and boots that went through soles faster than the company went through interns. I'm fifth-generation coal country. My grandfather surveyed for the C&O Railway. My father ran chain for the Army Corps of Engineers on the Kanawha River Flood Control Project in 1967. The land talks to you if you know how to listen, and my family has been listening for over 100 years. I've been widowed for 14 months. My wife, Margaret Ann Birch, née Collins, died of ovarian cancer. She was diagnosed 3 years ago. I don't talk about this at work. I never did. What I will say is this. I have a son, Caleb. He's 17, junior at Clairton Valley High School, plays third base, lives with me, and he has watched his father give everything to Gentry Resource Holdings for his entire conscious life. Everything. I want to be specific about what that word means, because people use it loosely, and I don't. When I started at Gentry Resource in my early 30s, Walter Gentry, the founder, the man who built this company from one 400-acre lease in Fayette County, handed me a set of keys to the archive room and said, "Nobody else has touched those files in 6 years. If you can make sense of them, the job is yours." I made sense of them. It took me 14 months. The records went back to the 1950s, some handwritten on onion skin paper, some typed on carbon forms that crumbled if you breathed on them wrong. pre-1970 Appalachian parcel numbering, survey designations that didn't correspond to any modern GIS coordinate system, mineral severance deeds written in language that referenced creek beds and tree stumps as legal boundary markers. I cross-referenced every document against county courthouse records. I walked the physical boundaries with a GPS unit in one hand and the original field notes in the other. I built the system those 11 cabinets held, a paper archive indexed by parcel, cross-filed by lease date and mineral type, with my own field verification notes attached to every active file. 47,000 acres. Every ridge, every hollow, every seam, and I did it while raising a son and losing a wife. 3 years ago, Margaret was diagnosed. I told no one at work. I adjusted my schedule, left earlier when I could, drove to Charleston for her treatments on Fridays, came back Monday mornings, and picked up where I left off. Nobody noticed because the work never slipped. That was the point. The work never slipped. 14 months ago, during her last week, the last week she was coherent, the last week she could still hold Caleb's hand and know whose hand she was holding. I was at the office until 11 at night, closing a lease renewal on 2,200 acres in McDowell County. The surface rights holder had contested the boundary language, and the filing deadline was Thursday. No one else in the company could read the original survey markers. No one else knew that the 1968 plat referenced a sandstone outcropping that had been redesignated in 1974 under a different parcel code. I closed it, drove to the hospital after midnight. Margaret was already asleep. Caleb was sitting in the chair next to her bed. He was 16. He looked up at me and didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I never told anyone at Gentry Resource that happened. That was the kind of man they fired on, a Tuesday at 4:17 p.m. Now let me tell you about the man who fired me. Tyler Weston Gentry, 26 years old, grandson of Walter Gentry, Wharton, MBA. Before arriving at Gentry Resource Holdings 7 months ago, his total professional experience consisted of 5 months at a fintech startup in Austin, Texas. 5 months. I've had lease disputes that lasted longer than his entire career. He got the title, Vice President of Operations. The way you get a title when your grandfather built the company, and your father, Craig, sits on the board. He leveraged a dinner conversation. Walter, who was 79 and had been semi-retired for 4 years, allowed it to keep family peace. Craig Gentry, who had never run a single day of operations in his life, endorsed it because it was his son. Tyler arrived with the vocabulary of someone who'd memorized a textbook and mistaken it for experience. Optimization, digital transformation, agile workflow, scalable solutions, fresh perspectives. He used these words the way some men use cologne. Too much, too often, hoping it would cover up what wasn't there. He had never walked a survey ridge, never held a soil core sample. I am not confident he knew what one looked like. 2 weeks before the firing, I was walking past Tyler's office. The door was cracked open. Hallway carried sound better than people realized. Something about the old ductwork in that building. I'd known that for 23 years. Tyler was on the phone. Speaker. I could hear Craig Gentry's voice on the other end. Tyler's father. Birch won't cause problems, Tyler said. He's 55. He's got a kid, and there's nobody in this industry going to hire a guy who still uses paper maps. He'll take the package and disappear. Craig's voice, tinny through the speaker. Just make sure it's clean. Your grandfather likes him. Grandpa likes everybody who's been here long enough. That's not a business strategy. That's nostalgia. I stood in that hallway for maybe 10 seconds, listening to a 26-year-old with 5 months of professional experience explain to his father why I was disposable. Something shifted in me, not anger. I want to be clear about that. Anger is loud and it's sloppy, and it makes you do things you have to apologize for later. This wasn't anger. It was clarity. The kind of clarity I learned in the Army, when the situation is exactly as bad as it looks, and the only question left is what you do with the information. Tuesday, 4:17 p.m. Tyler's glass office. Sandra Walsh holding the manila folder. The 11 cabinets visible through the open door behind me. Tyler didn't stand when I came in. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, the way you'd gesture a dog toward its crate. Harlan, we're restructuring the land management division. Going digital first, streamlining, the board wants innovation, new thinking. He said this while typing something on his MacBook. Your position is being eliminated effective immediately. Sandra has your separation paperwork. Sandra opened the folder. Her hands were steady, but her jaw was tight. I looked at the paperwork. Standard separation agreement, severance, non-disparagement clause, signature lines flagged with yellow tabs. I understand, I said. Tyler looked up from his laptop for the first time. I think he expected something else. An argument. A raised voice. Maybe he wanted me to say something he could use later to justify the decision. That's what young men like Tyler want. Resistance they can call unreasonable. I signed the separation agreement. Every page. Sandra watched me do it with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then I stood up and walked to my office. The office I'd occupied for 19 of my 23 years, and opened my bottom desk drawer. Inside were my personal field notebooks. 23 years of duplicate survey notes, handwritten in waterproof field binders, dated and initialed on every page. Standard professional practice for any licensed land surveyor. You always keep personal copies of your field observations. Always. That's not a company policy. That's the profession. I put the notebooks in my bag. 2 canvas tote bags. Heavy. Tyler was leaning against his doorframe watching me. Arms crossed. He saw me take the notebooks. He didn't ask what they were. He didn't know what they were. I walked past the archive room on my way out. The 11 cabinets sat under fluorescent light, humming faintly from the climate control unit I'd personally requisitioned in 2011 to protect the older documents from humidity. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I walked through the lobby, past the reception desk where the new girl whose name I'd never learned was packing up for the day, through the front doors, and into the parking lot. It was still light out, just barely. The hills beyond the access road were green and quiet, the way they always are in late spring in West Virginia, like they don't care what happens inside the buildings men put at their feet. I put the bags in my truck, sat behind the wheel, didn't start the engine. 55 years old, 23 years, 47,000 acres walked on foot. A dead wife, a son at home who'd already learned to stop expecting me before dark, and a 26-year-old who thought paper maps were the problem. I started the truck. If you've ever had a boss who looked at your life's work and called it dead weight, hit that like button and subscribe. I drove home with the windows down, took the long way, Route 19, through the river cut where the road follows the New River Gorge for about 6 miles before turning south toward Clairton Valley. The air smelled like wet limestone and cut grass. I wasn't in a hurry. For the first time in 23 years, nobody was waiting on me to solve anything. The house was quiet when I pulled in. Small place. 3 bedrooms, one of which had been Margaret's sewing room, and was now just a room with a sewing machine nobody touched. White clapboard. Needed paint on the south side. I'd been saying that for 2 years. Rex met me at the door. 9-year-old yellow Labrador with a gray muzzle and a bad hip he pretended didn't bother him. He knew something was different. Dogs always know. He didn't bring me a ball or wag at the door the way he usually did. He just stood there, looked at me, and then walked to the back deck and lay down in his spot. Like he was saying, "Come sit." So I did. I poured 3 fingers of bourbon. Not the daily drinker. The good stuff. Blanton's, from the bottle Margaret had given me for our 20th anniversary, 2 months before the diagnosis. I'd been saving it for something. I wasn't sure this was it, but I opened it anyway. The back deck faces east, toward the ridge. You can see the tree line from the chair I always sit in, and below that the old rail grade where the C&O used to run coal cars down to the Kanawha. My grandfather surveyed that grade in 1951. I knew the elevation within 2 feet from memory. I heard the screen door open behind me. Caleb's cleats on the deck boards. He still had dirt on his uniform pants. Practice must have run long. He didn't ask why my truck was in the driveway at 5 p.m. He'd never seen it there at 5 p.m. on a weekday in his entire life. He looked at the bourbon, looked at me, sat down in the other chair. We sat there for maybe 10 minutes without saying a word. Rex between us, chin on his paws. The hills going dark in that slow way they do when the sun drops behind the western ridge and the whole valley turns blue for about 20 minutes before it turns black. Caleb finally said, "You okay, Dad?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm okay." He nodded. Didn't push it. Smart kid. He'd learned that from Margaret, not from me. Margaret always knew when to let silence do the work. I called Gary Mitchell the next morning at 7:15 a.m. Gary and I went back to Fort Leonard Wood. He'd been a combat engineer, same as me, 2 years behind, and after his discharge, he'd gone to law school at WVU on the GI Bill and built a practice in Charleston specializing in Appalachian mineral law, surface rights disputes, lease adjudication, the kind of law that requires you to understand both the legal language and the actual ground it's written about. Gary understood both. He also understood me. "I figured I'd be hearing from you," he said when he picked up. "No hello, just that. Tyler Gentry fired me yesterday." "I know. Dennis Reed called me last night." Of course he did. Dennis had Gary's number because I'd given it to him 3 years ago during the McDowell County surface rights dispute, and Dennis was the kind of man who kept every number he'd ever been given. "Walk me through the separation agreement," Gary said. I did. Every clause. Gary listened without interrupting, which meant he was taking notes. When I finished, he was quiet for about 8 seconds. Then he said, "Pull up your original employment contract, Section 9. I had it in the filing cabinet in my home office. Not a copy. The original, countersigned by Walter Gentry in 2001. I'd kept it the way I kept everything. Organized, dated, accessible within 30 seconds. Section 9, Paragraph C. Gary had drafted that language himself, 23 years ago, as a favor to me before I'd signed on. He read it aloud to make sure I was hearing what he was hearing. "Nothing in this agreement shall restrict the employee from providing expert testimony in judicial or administrative proceedings concerning matters of public record, mineral survey data, or land title disputes, provided such testimony is based on the employee's independent professional knowledge and documented expertise." He let it sit for a moment. "Harlan, the moment they let you go, you are no longer bound by any non-compete tied to third-party testimony. You can testify, and you'd be the most credible witness in that room." "I know," I said. "So what are you going to do?" "Wait." Gary laughed. Not a big laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from knowing someone for 30 years and not being surprised by them. "You always were the most patient bastard I ever met," he said. "Army taught me that." "No, it didn't. You were like that at Leonard Wood. You just got better at it." I hung up, poured black coffee from the pot Caleb had made before school, sat at the kitchen table with my field notebooks stacked in front of me. 23 years of handwritten survey notes. Every ridge, every hollow, every boundary marker. Dated, initialed, cross-referenced to parcel numbers I could recite from memory. I didn't file anything. I didn't call anyone. I didn't send a single email. I waited. What I was waiting for didn't take long. Within 72 hours of my firing, Tyler hired a document digitization firm out of Richmond, DataBridge Solutions. They had a good website and a client list that included 3 Fortune 500 companies, none of which operated in extractive industries, none of which held mineral leases in Appalachia, and none of which had ever dealt with pre-1970 survey parcel designations. The data bridge team arrived on a Friday. 4 technicians with high-speed scanners and a cloud-based document management platform. They were polite, professional, completely unqualified for the task Tyler had given them. Here's what you need to understand about Appalachian mineral rights documentation. The parcel numbering system used in southern West Virginia before 1970 was not standardized. It was county-specific, sometimes township-specific, and in some cases it was based on physical landmarks that had been renamed, relocated, or destroyed in the intervening decades. A parcel designated Fayette 7 NW14 in a 1963 survey plat might correspond to a completely different boundary than a parcel with a similar designation in the modern GIS system. The only way to reconcile the two was to physically walk the boundary with the original field notes and compare the survey markers in the ground to the descriptions on the page. I had done this for every active lease across 47,000 acres. It had taken me 23 years. The data bridge technicians scanned the documents, sorted them by folder label, and imported them into their cloud system in 6 weeks. They didn't know what they were looking at. They couldn't have. They sorted by what was printed on the tabs. They had no way of knowing that the tab designations in my filing system referenced my own cross-indexing code, a code that existed only in my field notebooks and in my head. They mislabeled 19 lease parcels. 19. Tyler announced the completion of the digital transformation in a company-wide email. I know this because Dennis Reed forwarded it to me without comment. The subject line was, "Exciting changes. Gentry Resource moves forward." The body included the phrases, "clean," "scalable," "agile," and "modernizing our legacy infrastructure." Tyler's signature block included his title, Vice President of Operations, and a quote attributed to Peter Drucker that I'm fairly certain Peter Drucker never said. Dennis added one line at the bottom of the forwarded email. "Thought you should see this." I read it at my kitchen table. Rex was asleep under my chair. I closed the email and opened the newspaper. 9 weeks after my firing, the first letter arrived at Gentry Resource Holdings, a mineral rights attorney in Morgantown, representing a family that had held subsurface rights on 600 acres in Fayette County since 1947. The letter stated that the lease boundary descriptions in Gentry's recently updated digital records did not match the original survey plat on file with the county courthouse. The family was formally disputing the lease terms. Then 4 more letters arrived. Then 9 more. 14 mineral rights holders filed formal boundary disputes within 5 weeks of each other. 14 families and trusts, some of whom had held those mineral rights for 3 generations, all challenging lease boundaries based on the digitized records. Records that now contradicted the physical survey markers still sitting in the ground where I'd verified them. 3 extraction sites went dark. Operations suspended pending legal review. Equipment sitting idle. Crews sent home. Revenue frozen. $89 million in active leases, locked up in dispute. Dennis Reed texted me on the day the 3rd site went offline. I was sitting on the back deck. It was a Thursday evening. Caleb was doing homework at the kitchen table inside. Rex was at my feet. The text came through at 6:23 p.m. "You might want to know, it's falling apart exactly the way you said it would." I read it. Didn't respond. Set the phone down on the arm of the chair. The hills were dark. Somewhere below the ridgeline, a coal train was moving south along the river. I could hear the low rumble of it. The sound I'd been hearing my whole life. The sound of the valley working. 2 weeks later, a Charleston law firm handling 3 of the 14 disputes contacted Gary Mitchell. They needed an expert witness, someone with direct professional knowledge of the original survey boundaries, someone with the credentials and the documentation to testify about what those boundaries actually were versus what the digitized records now claimed. Gary called me. "They want to retain you." I figured. Your field notebooks, your surveyor's license, your 23 years of documented expertise. Harlan, You're not just a witness. You're the only witness. I know. Are you ready for this? I've been ready since 4:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. The legal filing was notarized and submitted on a Thursday morning. Harlan Birch, licensed land surveyor, state of West Virginia, retained as expert witness in the matter of mineral rights boundary disputes against Gentry Resource Holdings. Section 9, Paragraph C. My independent professional knowledge, my documented expertise, my personal field notebooks, 23 years of handwritten survey notes kept at home, separate from company property, per standard surveying professional practice. Bulletproof. At 9:47 a.m., I faxed my written notice of expert witness engagement to Gentry Resource Holdings General Counsel. Then I poured black coffee, sat at the kitchen table, opened the newspaper. My phone rang 43 minutes later. Gentry Resource Holdings. Main line. I looked at the screen. Let it ring. 4 rings. 5. Click. The call went to voicemail. I didn't listen to it. 2 more calls came that afternoon. One from a number I didn't recognize, probably outside counsel. One from the main line again. I let them both ring through. By evening, there were 7 missed calls on my phone. I set it face down on the kitchen counter and made dinner. Pork chops. Caleb's favorite. He came in from practice with dirt on his knees and his glove tucked under his arm and stopped in the doorway. "You're cooking," he said. "I'm cooking." "You never cook on Thursdays." "I'm cooking on this one." He sat down at the table and watched me like I was a species he was still identifying. Rex sat between us, nose pointed at the stove, optimistic about his chances. I didn't tell Caleb what I'd done that morning. He didn't need to know yet. What he needed was pork chops and a father who was present in the room, and for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit, I could give him both. 47 miles northeast, in the oak-paneled study at Gentry Resources' main office, a different kind of evening was unfolding. Frank Howard read my notice 3 times. Frank was 58, had been with the company 19 years, and was the kind of general counsel who understood that his job wasn't to make problems disappear. It was to see them coming early enough to walk around them. He had seen this one coming. He'd told Tyler as much in week 3, when the DataBridge team started scanning documents they couldn't interpret. Tyler had told him to stay in his lane. Now Frank was in Walter Gentry's study at 6:40 p.m., standing in front of the old man's desk with a single sheet of fax paper in his hand, smelling cigar smoke and old leather, and knowing exactly how bad this was about to get. "We have a situation, Walter. A significant one." Walter was in his chair behind the desk. Short cigar. The same oak desk he'd used since 1974. The one Tyler had replaced in his own office within 2 weeks. Walter didn't speak. He waited. The way men who built something from nothing wait. Because they've learned that the first person to talk is usually the person who doesn't have control of the room. Frank read Section 9, Paragraph C aloud. Every word. When he finished, he set the paper on Walter's desk. Walter looked at it. The cigar burned between his fingers, the ash getting long. He didn't touch the paper. 11 seconds of silence. I know this because Frank told Dennis, and Dennis told me, and Dennis was the kind of man who counted things like that. "Where's Tyler?" Walter said. Not a question, a direction. They found Tyler in the conference room, on his laptop, drafting a response to one of the dispute letters. He'd been writing it himself, without legal review, without counsel present. Frank Howard would later describe this to the board as the single most reckless thing I've witnessed in 19 years of practice. Walter stood in the doorway, Frank behind him. Tyler looked up with the expression of someone who'd been interrupted during something important. "We need to talk about Birch," Walter said. Tyler leaned back. "Grandpa, I've got this handled. It's a clerical error in the digitization. We'll fix the files, refile the boundary descriptions, and the disputes will collapse." "With what documentation, Tyler?" "The digital records. That's the whole point of the system." The digital records are what they're disputing. The original paper files were your ground truth. Who's going to verify them against the physical survey markers? Tyler paused. For the first time since I'd known him, which was only 7 months, but that was enough, he didn't have a buzzword ready. We'll hire a surveyor, he said. You had a surveyor, Walter said. For 23 years. You fired him and laughed at his filing cabinets. That's not the leaseholders already filed, Tyler. You can't unring that bell. Frank stepped forward. He placed the facts on the conference table, facing Tyler. Harlan Birch has been retained as an expert witness by opposing counsel in 3 of the 14 active disputes. His testimony will be based on his personal field notebooks, which he kept at home per standard professional practice, and his credentials as a licensed land surveyor in the state of West Virginia. His original employment contract contains an explicit carve-out for expert testimony in public mineral rights proceedings. Section 9, Paragraph C. I reviewed it this afternoon. The language is clean. It's airtight. And I didn't draft it. His personal attorney did, 23 years ago, before he ever signed on. Tyler picked up the facts. Read it. I'm told his face didn't drain of color the way it does in movies. It just went very still. The kind of still that happens when the brain is processing something the ego hasn't agreed to yet. He can't do this, Tyler said. He signed a separation agreement. The separation agreement contains a standard non-disparagement clause and a general release, Frank said. It does not override a pre-existing contractual carve-out for expert testimony in matters of public record. I checked. Twice. So we fight it. Walter sat down at the head of the conference table, the chair Tyler usually sat in during meetings. Tyler didn't say anything about it. Fight what? Walter said. Fight a licensed surveyor testifying from his own field notes about boundaries he personally walked? In front of a judge in mineral rights court in West Virginia, where half the bench grew up in coal country and knows what a survey plat looks like? That's not a fight, Tyler. That's a sentencing. Tyler looked at his grandfather, then at Frank, then at the facts in his hand. I was trying to modernize this company, he said. Walter took a long draw on his cigar. Let the smoke out slow. You were trying to play CEO with a company you don't understand, and the man who understood it better than anyone, better than me, better than your father, better than anyone who's ever worked here, is now sitting across the table from us, because you put him there. Walter called the emergency board session for the following Tuesday. 7 voting members, Walter presiding as chairman. The agenda had one item. Tyler wasn't given advance notice of what it was. The vote was 7-0, unanimous. Removal of Tyler Weston Gentry from the position of Vice President of Operations, effective immediately. Craig Gentry, Tyler's father, abstained from speaking during the session. He sat in his chair with his hands flat on the mahogany table and looked at the wall behind Walter's head the entire time. Tyler was escorted from the building by a security guard named Dale Perkins. Dale was 62. He'd walked me out of the same building 18 weeks earlier, and when he'd done it, he'd put his hand on my shoulder in the parking lot and said, "This ain't right, Harlan." He didn't put his hand on Tyler's shoulder. Walter watched from the doorway of his study, cigar in hand. He said nothing. 6 weeks later, I sat in a deposition room in Charleston. Wood-paneled walls, long table. Court reporter in the corner with her fingers on the keys. 3 attorneys for the plaintiffs on one side. 2 attorneys for Gentry Resource on the other. Frank Howard was there as corporate representative, sitting behind Gentry's counsel with a legal pad he barely wrote on. I brought my field notebooks, 23 years of handwritten survey notes in waterproof field binders. Dated, initialed, every page. 2 canvas bags, same ones I'd carried out of the office on a Tuesday at 4:17 p.m. I set them on the table and opened the first binder. I testified for 2 days. Calm, specific. Every question answered with the precision I'd learned in the Army and practiced across 47,000 acres of Appalachian terrain. I identified each of the 19 mislabeled parcels by original designation, by my field verification date, and by the physical survey markers still present at each boundary, markers I could describe from memory, including GPS coordinates I'd recorded in my notebooks. On the second day, opposing counsel asked me to characterize the digitization contractor's work. I thought about it for 3 seconds. They digitized the labels, I said. They had no way to digitize what the labels meant. The court reporter's fingers stopped for a half second, then resumed. Frank Howard closed his eyes. Not in frustration, in recognition. The way a man closes his eyes when he hears the exact thing he knew was coming and couldn't prevent. The $23 million settlement was reached before trial. $23 million. The same number as the years I'd spent building what Tyler had dismantled in 6 weeks with a Richmond contractor and a company-wide email about agile workflow. Tyler Gentry did not return to the energy industry. Last I heard through Dennis, he was in Dallas, working for his father-in-law's commercial real estate firm. A job that had been arranged, not earned. Some patterns don't break. Walter Gentry called me once, about a month after the settlement was finalized. I was on the back deck. Rex was at my feet. It was late afternoon, that blue hour before dark. I let family cloud my business judgment. He said, no preamble, no small talk. Walter was 79 years old and had built a company from one 400-acre lease with his own hands. He didn't waste words. I know, I said. I'm sorry, Harlan. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. I could hear the faint sound of his study, the creak of the leather chair, the tick of the clock on his mantel. You could have warned me, he said, about the files, about what would happen. I could have, I said, but you didn't ask, and your grandson told me I was legacy infrastructure. Walter didn't respond to that. He didn't need to. We both knew the conversation was over. I didn't go back to Gentry Resource. They offered. Walter made the call personally, twice. I declined both times. I took a consulting position with a mineral rights firm in Beckley, smaller, honest, run by a woman named Dorothy Caldwell, who'd been in Appalachian land law for 30 years and understood what a field notebook was worth. The pay was less. The hours were mine. On a Saturday in October, I drove Caleb to his fall league game. It was cold. The kind of cold that comes early in the West Virginia mountains, when the leaves are still turning, but the air already tastes like winter. I sat in the bleachers with black coffee from the gas station and Rex on a leash beside me. Caleb played third base, made a throw from the hole in the 4th inning that would have made his mother stand up in the bleachers. I stood up instead. He saw me, didn't wave, didn't showboat, just turned back toward the infield with the smallest nod. The kind of nod that means, I see you there. After the game, we drove home, Rex in the back seat with his head out the window despite the cold. Caleb was quiet for a while, the way 17-year-olds are quiet when they're working up to something. You seem different this week, Dad, he said. Like you're actually here when you're here. I looked at the road, the hills, the river below us, the same river my grandfather had surveyed 70 years ago. I am, I said. He nodded. That was enough. That evening, I sat on the back deck with the last 3 fingers from the Blantons, the bottle Margaret had given me, Rex at my feet. The ridge dark against a sky full of stars you can only see when you're far enough from a city to remember what the dark is supposed to look like. I thought about the 11 cabinets, about Tyler's glass desk and his MacBook, and the word legacy used as an insult by a man who'd never built anything worth inheriting. I thought about Margaret, about the sewing room nobody used, about driving to the hospital after midnight and finding her already asleep. I thought about Caleb's nod from third base, the smallest gesture, the one that meant everything. Sometimes justice doesn't come in a courtroom. It comes in a Thursday evening with pork chops on the stove and your son's cleats on the deck. It arrives quietly, in handwriting nobody else can read, in field notebooks carried home in canvas bags by a man they told was obsolete. Because when you've spent 23 years walking the ground, you don't need to raise your voice. The ground speaks for you. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and ring that notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.